You are about to enter the courtroom. The people are real. The cases are real. The rulings are final. This is...
My client, Mary Sidney Herbert, would now like to take credit for the work she rightfully wrote under the name of William Shakespeare. Anything to add, Mrs. Herbert?
None whatsoever.
My client, however, would like to keep his larger presence in the pantheon of great playwrights, such as himself. If he were to admit that he solely did not create all of these works, his reputation would be soiled. Is this true, Mr. Shakespeare?
Indeed it is.
Now, it has come to my attention that Mrs. Herbert did in fact write under the name of William Shakespeare. Is this a true statement, Mr. Shakespeare?
Yes, it is true. However, she approached me first with an enticing offer, saying I would become an acclaimed playwright, as well as receiving a fair amount of money. I did not plagiarize her work by any means, let that be clear. All I did was accept her offer, allowing her to write under my name. Who am I to turn down such a tempting offer?
Mr. Shakespeare, I will answer the questions. William here was approached by Mrs. Herbert asking if she could use his name for the authorship of her plays. In this agreement, it is clear that Mrs. Herbert would receive no recognition whatsoever, and she would receive no credit for her work. All, if any credit, would go to Mr. Shakespeare. Is this true, Mrs. Herbert?
This is an outrage. I got him to where he is now. Without my work, all he would be is some washed-up actor with no future. I, on the other hand, wrote those stage-worthy plays deserving of the theater, and I get nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Mary, please. Mary has been trained in alchemy and medicine. She is fluent in French, Italian, Latin, and Spanish. Her incomparable intelligence was only accompanied by a love of music and a love for musical instruments. She was an active participant in the theater and both politically outspoken and involved. From Did a Woman Write Shakespeare? The Mary Sidney Herbert Society. All of these characteristics were essential for the plays written by this so-called William Shakespeare. Do you even possess any of these qualities, Mr. Shakespeare?
Of course I do. Contrary to your belief, I am a well-educated man. Your efforts to insult my intelligence are elementary.
William, for the love of all that is holy, please stop talking. William may not have possessed all of these qualities, but it is quite possible that all the plays meeting these requisites were only written by Mrs. Herbert herself. Answer me this, though, Mrs. Herbert. Why would you choose to write under someone else's name if you had already published works of your own? It seems highly illogical that a woman of your intelligence would need a fake name if you were already publishing.
Yes, it is true that I did write under his name, along with publishing works of my own under my name. However, I do have sufficient reasoning. My original unpublished dramatic verse was only allowed to go through the process of publication because it was for Queen Elizabeth herself. My play written in English was only meant to be read out loud in aristocratic homes. It could have never made it to the stage where it obviously belonged, according to the Did a Woman Write Shakespeare by the Mary Sidney Herbert Society. Now, if we are going to get all technical, explain to me this. Your client doesn't even have proof that he was paid as a writer.
Excuse me?
What my client is trying to say here is that there's no evidence Mr. Shakespeare here was even paid as a writer. No official documentation of any sort. There is also no evidence that he had an education in French, Italian, Latin, or that he had any kind of upper-level schooling. There is also no manuscripts or pieces of any manuscripts from his plays. To quote, "There is no documentation of anyone personally referring to him as a writer." From the Mary Sidney Herbert Society, Did a Woman Write Shakespeare? The only thing we know for sure is that he was an actor in 2 of Ben Jonson's plays and was a shareholder of the Globe Theatre.
If I'm correct, we are not here to decide whether or not my client did or did not write these plays.
I did write them, you know.
Mr. Shakespeare, please. We know William wrote plays. That is not the question here. We are here to discuss whether or not Mrs. Herbert deserves credit for the things she wrote under Mr. Shakespeare's name.
The woman made a deal. It is not my fault she's having buyer's remorse.
I just believe that due to the fact that my work is so highly acclaimed, that I should be credited at the very least. I'm not wanting fame, nor do I want Mr. Shakespeare's money. All I want is for people to know that I wrote them.
My client only wants recognition for her work. She does not want to deprive Mr. Shakespeare of his fame. Mrs. Herbert does not want to take away the money William made on her plays. All she wants is the credit she deserves from writing some of William's greatest plays.
Mr. Shakespeare and I understand that Mrs. Herbert would like to be credited with her work, but she made a deal with Mr. Shakespeare to write under his name. It is terribly sad that her work will not be recognized as her own, but that is what it is, and that is how it will stay.
Mr. Shakespeare, don't you think you've had your turn? Don't you think it's time to tell the truth?
Listen, I know I didn't write all of my plays. It would be nearly impossible for me to be both an actor as well as an astounding playwright that produced as many works as I did. I did not plagiarize Mrs. Herbert, let that be clear. I accepted her offer, meaning that anything that came along with her works was credited to me. If she wanted credit for her plays, then she should have published them herself. It is known to the public that I wrote all of the plays, and it will stay that way.
I think we're done here. Until next time.